Welcome to the big interview at WSJ Live. I'm Simon Constable. Senator Rand Paul has just re-released his book, Government Bullies, and he joins us on the set to discuss that and many other things. Thank you for being here, sir. Appreciate your time. This book is about the way the government is intruding into everyday life of people in a way that you think is over the top. Can you quickly summarize why you wrote the book and why you thought it was necessary?
Well, I think sometimes people have good intentions. They write regulations to try to prevent people from, let's say, dumping chemicals in the East River. We probably all agree no one should be allowed to dump chemicals in the East River. But then
I think we've passed that point, though.
Well, yeah, I think that. But the point is that the Clean Water Act says you can't discharge pollutants into a navigable river. But in the book, I talk about how they took that to mean that clean dirt is a pollutant and your backyard's a river. Well, both of those aren't true, but now we put people in jail for actually putting dirt in their backyard and raising the elevation, as if that were the same as dumping chemicals in the East River. So we were well-intentioned, we wrote the Clean Water Act, but now it got transformed over time into meaning something that's putting innocent people actually in jail. There's a man in jail for 10 years for raising the elevation of commercial property.
Now, this book isn't all about pollutants and stuff, but it's a lot about individuals, small businesses having to deal with government. There's a great quote in here by Ayn Rand. It says, "The only power any government has is the power to crack down on criminals. Well, when there aren't enough criminals, one makes them." And she goes on. It's a great quote. Is that how you see the situation now? The government is making criminals out of otherwise law-abiding citizens?
Well, you know, the audience can judge for themselves, but John and Judy Dollarite are from Missouri, and they wanted their teenage son to learn a business. They gave him some bunny rabbits, and he began breeding them. Well, they got a surprise visit from the USDA, and they didn't have the proper license.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Yeah. They surprise inspection. They didn't have their license, and then they got a bill for $3.9 million. But, you know, the government's pretty understanding, so they said, you know what, we have a website, and if you pay, you can pay by credit card, and if you pay within 30 days, it'll only be $90,000.
And this
that may be an overreach, I think.
And this was because there's a rule you said you can't sell more than $500 worth of rabbits a year, right?
Exactly.
But it's an absolute, it doesn't matter when this was, whether it's 50 years ago.
This is the absurdity of government. When you give this much power to unelected people, absurd things will happen. Just recently, and this isn't in the book, but the recent addition to that story is Marty the magician has one rabbit, and he pulls it out of a hat. He gets surprise inspections, and guess what? They ask him, do you have your disaster plan for evacuation of your bunny in times of a natural disaster such as an earthquake? He has to have a written plan. He has to carry it with him everywhere. He now has a 26-page plan on how he's going to evacuate his bunny. He has his license, but he was talking to the inspector, and he says, you know what? If I shoot this bunny in front of you and eat it, I don't have to have a license at all for that, but if I want to pull the bunny out of the hat in front of a bunch of elementary school kids, I've got to have a license.
Keeping with the legal theme, rare event, you and Eric Holder on the same side on something, and this is about the mandatory sentencing of drug offenders. Why do you favor removing that?
Well, I think it's along the same veins of this, and it's exactly right to put them together because we've over-criminalized and we put people in jail for breaking regulations. I think we've over-criminalized possession of drugs. Now, I'm not for getting rid of the laws, but I am for saying that if your son or my son were involved with this, I would want them to be rehabilitated, not incarcerated. So I don't think putting people in jail for possession of drugs is helpful. I think a lot of young men, particularly young African-American men in our cities, all have criminal records now. It hurts them in getting jobs. It hurts them from progressing with their life, from joining the middle class. All of this done for a non-violent crime that really I think we should be treating as a health problem and less as an incarceration problem.
Do you see much support for your position and Eric Holder's position within the Beltway?
I think out across the countryside you do, and it's amazing. People say, well, you're a Republican. What about conservative Christians in your state? Interestingly, when you ask conservative evangelical ministers, there was an interview where they asked Jerry Falwell, who's no longer living, Pat Robertson, and Cal Thomas. They asked them, what would you want to happen to someone in your church who was caught with drugs? Would you want them to go to prison, or would you want them to get counseling? Every one of them says counseling. It's the common sense answer. No one's going to answer. If I ask you, would you rather your kid go to jail or get counseling? Everybody's going to answer counseling. So why are we sending kids to jail? So I think it's actually an issue that resonates not only among Republicans but Democrats. But ask young people, whether or not we should be putting people in jail for pot, and I think they'll all say it's a waste of time and money to put them in jail.
Immigration in the news. A lot of illegal immigrants here. Solutions are being put out. What's your solution to this?
I think you have to do something. We have 11 million people here, undocumented, and we need to figure out a way to document them. I'm for giving them work visas. If you give them work visas, I think then you incorporate them into society, they'll pay taxes and become like the rest of us. In order to do that, though, you have to have a secure border, because you can't invite the world to come visit and stay and say, hey, here's America, come and stay.
Does it have to be first? Does the border have to be first before you?
I think a couple things have to happen. Many conservatives, myself included, we're not very trustful of this administration. We're also not very trustful of government in general to do what they promised to do. In 1986, we did have a plan where we normalized 3 million people. And they said, well, we're going to secure the border. Well, now we have 11 million more people here, so that obviously is sort of objective fact that we didn't secure the border. So what I said is I had an amendment which didn't pass, and so I didn't vote for the bill that came to the Senate. My amendment was called Trust But Verify. It says that Congress should decide when the border is secure. Security should start first. After a year, we vote. Is the border more secure than it was last year? If it is, we proceed with giving people work visas. And we vote every year for 5 years. That way we don't leave it up to the president. We actually bring it back to Congress.
So basically, in some ways, you're talking amnesty here. Give people who are here illegally work visas. Should I be calling my mother up and saying, Mom, get on the plane now, Rand Paul's going to give you amnesty, because I know she'd like to...
I think it's a mistake. I think we dumb down the conversation once we use words like amnesty.
Okay,
because I think what we have now is what I would call de facto amnesty. You have 11 million people here. Some broke the law to come here, but interestingly, when we say amnesty, we don't actually get to the nitty-gritty. Of the 11 million, 40% of them came here legally. They got a visa and they came to this country. How did they become illegal? They chose a job that paid better. If you pick crops in our country, it's about $9 an hour. Construction might be $14 an hour. It's illegal to go from picking crops to construction work. Now, if you or I did it and we were making $9 an hour, our family would come home and applaud us for making more money.
Yeah.
I don't consider that you're a criminal because you want to make more money. So I actually think that many of the people who came here and they have broken our visa laws, it's because big government visa laws aren't working very well. We ought to change it and make it easier for you to switch jobs when you come here.
What about the Republican Party? How is the Republican Party going to come to a consensus on this? There is some infighting over immigration. Right. How does it...
I think we have to work our way through it. First thing is I think you're seeing the Republican Party more open now to discussing immigration reform. Some of that's electoral politics. Elections do teach you things. If you want to win election, you have to learn from them. But I would say with immigration that the lesson is that we should do something. It doesn't mean that we should do anything that comes down the pike, though. And so I'm for doing immigration reform.
So what's a minimum that you have to have, and what line will you not cross?
To me is any bill that comes across has to be expand work visas in a large way to accommodate the need for workers. The second thing it has to do is Congress has to decide when the border is secure, and border security should come first.
Okay, so border security first. Moving overseas, you're not a fan of aid to governments that don't like us. Let's focus on...
I think that could be a first step. We could just start with, if you hate us, we're not going to give you any of our money.
Let's focus on Egypt, because Egypt's in the news. There's been a change of government. It was an elected government. You don't think we should be giving money to that unelected...
The law says we shouldn't. The law says when there's a military coup, military aid should end. So if the military helps to or assists in overthrowing an elected government, even if we don't like the elected government, I didn't like the Muslim Brotherhood and I wasn't for funding them either. But I think now to say, oh, we're going to fund the generals and that's going to make them like us, well, maybe, but do you think that endears us to the Egyptian people? There was a poll done recently in Egypt. 80% of the Egyptian people don't want our aid. And when they're being doused with tear gas in Tahrir Square, made in Pennsylvania, bought with foreign aid, it doesn't endear them to foreign aid either.
And I think a lot of people can relate to that attitude is, maybe we shouldn't be giving money to people who aren't supporting democratic principles. But what if it's overall worse for us? Our only ally in the Middle East is right next door to Egypt. It's Israel. Do they want a Islamic state to get hold in Egypt? I mean, if that's what some people were pointing to,
the current general is an Islamist. He was appointed by Morsi. I would think if you lived in Israel, you'd feel more uncomfortable if you had more F-16s and more tanks. Egypt has 4,000 tanks. They've got 200 F-16. Do you think Israel feels more secure by giving more weapons? Where would F-16s be used? They're not going to be used in Egypt. They would be used against a foreign either attacker or to attack a foreign country. So if I lived in Israel, and I am a supporter of Israel, I would not want more weapons to go to Egypt.
Is Russia our friend?
You know, I think it's they're more our friend than they used to be, or they're less our enemy than they used to be. And I think it's a complicated question. Is it a good idea for us to engage with Russia? Yes. Is it a good idea to trade with Russia? Yes. Are they necessarily someone we can trust to watch the crown jewels while we're away? Probably not.
Turning now domestically, the Affordable Care Act. You're not a fan of that, but we're here now.
That's an understatement. That's a British understatement?
I think okay. That is a British understatement, okay. But you really don't like it. But we're sort of part way into it. Now, what do you do now? I mean, now that we are where we are, not where we want to be, right. What do you want to see changed? And would you really shut down the government on this?
I'm not in favor of shutting the government down. I think that's a stupid idea, and not my idea, not something I'm promoting. I would say, though, that I was elected to oppose Obamacare, and once I go to Washington, because I'm in the minority, I shouldn't just give up and say, oh, well, I was elected to do this, but sorry, guys, I can't do anything for the next 6 years because I'm in the minority. We control the House of Representatives, 1/3 of the government. Doesn't mean we can get our way, doesn't mean we can win, we can get everything we want, but I think we certainly should fight to defund Obamacare. If we lose and the Democrats say, oh, we're going to keep funding it, then we go to a conference committee and then we get maybe something in between. But right now,
let's focus on the in between.
But right now we're doing nothing. And many on our side have said, oh, we're not going to do anything. So basically President Obama gets what he wants. That's not us standing up for what we believe in. If we fight to an impasse, House Republicans have a defund measure, Senate Democrats say, no, we're funding the whole thing. You go to conference committee, maybe we get a delay as a compromise. Maybe we get a delay of the individual mandate. The president's already delayed the employer mandate. Why don't we delay the whole damn thing for another year, because it's going to be a disaster for our economy.
Delay, not roll back completely.
No, I'm for repeal. I'm for rollback completely. But I'm acknowledging to you that we may not win. But I am saying I will fight, and I will fight to get to the point where we can use the leverage of controlling 1/3 of the government to make the bill less bad, maybe at the very least.
We've got a debt ceiling debate coming up, no doubt. Why does Congress insist on having these debates over the debt ceiling when the government, when Congress
says... Because we're broke.
When Congress says we approve this spending bill, they have approved the spending, and then to come out and say, well,
we don't have spending bills. We haven't had spending bills in years. We haven't had a budget passed in years. So it's 3 or 4 years since we've had a budget. It's 3 or 4 years since we passed any significant appropriation bills. So the only time to have leverage once again to get anything good enacted is when there's a threat, when there's a deadline. So either a deadline, that continuing resolution, money for funding the government, or a debt ceiling comes up. I'm actually personally a big fan of attaching things to the debt ceiling to use it as leverage to try to get budgetary reform. I was part of a group a year and a half ago that said, why don't we have a balanced budget amendment passed and we'll raise the debt ceiling? That's one thing that most of us who oppose raising the debt ceiling.
Is that likely to happen?
It would only happen if we had the nerve and the guts to go through deadlines and force the Democrats to come to the table. So we haven't.
Do you? Do you have the guts?
I do, but I don't think I have enough. I don't have enough colleagues to do it. But what I would say is we have to have the guts to use our leverage. But I didn't get my way, but because I was a vocal person for using the leverage, we did get the sequester. The sequester is a step in the right direction. For the first time, we are now having some restraint in the growth of spending. We didn't actually cut spending, but we're restraining the growth of spending, all because some of us stood up and said, we're going to fight for what people elected us to fight for.
Let's wrap up. You and Chris Christie had a bit of a tiff, shall we say. There's a bit of understatement there. It looks like, and I know you haven't officially declared, but it looks like you two would be front runners to be Republican nominee for president. You have positions, on immigration, that we need more immigrants in the country. We need to fix that situation. You don't like the Affordable Care Act. You want that rolled back. you don't want to give foreign aid to governments that hate us. How do you think that plays with the American public versus Chris Christie's view of the world?
I think it's overwhelmingly popular to say we've got needs at home and we don't need to be sending money to countries that hate us. I think as far as some of the libertarian ideas of believe in respecting and preserving privacy for individuals on the internet or their phone calls with personal data, I think is overwhelmingly popular with people we need to bring into the party, with young people who gravitated towards the president. And I think the ideas of being more inclusive and bringing in people of all different variety of races into the Republican Party is something we're going to have to do if we're going to win elections.
On the Republican Party, it seems from the outside that there's a lot of infighting. It seems disjointed. It seems, to include. It seems it's a very big tent with a lot of different factions in it. Is that sustainable?
So's the Democrat Party. You just notice it less because there's one titular head. There's the president. He's been the head of it for 8 years, so it's a lot easier for them. We're going to have, if we have a presidential primary in 2016, at least 10 candidates. We always kind of do, unless there's an incumbent president. So it is easier.
And you're going to be one of those.
I don't know about that, but I do know that it is easier for the Democrats to appear unified, but they have all the same disparate factions within the Democrat Party.
So that's an illusion is what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I'm saying it's not bad to have some disagreements in the party, as long as we don't say it's to the exclusion of others. What upset me a little bit about the comments was like, oh, we don't need you libertarian, conservatives, constitutionalist, Tea Party kind of people in our party. Well, that's exactly what you need in your party if you want energy and you want to win elections. So I think we need a big party, but I think it's big enough for Christie, myself, and others.
Great. Big enough for both of you. Thank you very much, Senator Rand Paul.